Episode 100. This week we cover Neutral Zone. This one, for our 100th episode, was the Next Generation's last episode of Season 1, and wow, was it a letdown compared to the previous week. They should have stuck with Conspiracy as the season finale, but they said, no, let's do one more, and boy, it was a bad choice. It was not a good episode. Now, essentially, you had two main plots going. When they start the thing up, Captain Picard had gone to Starfleet, like at a starbase somewhere, to get orders, and he's on his way back in a shuttlecraft. They forgot the last week where it was out of sequence in the production run, and he was totally fine going to Starfleet to get orders on a major problem. Nothing to see there, they said. He's on his way back. And then on the Enterprise, they pick up the trail of this ancient-looking space vehicle from Earth. And they're like, that looks interesting. Let's check that out. And then Riker uncharacteristically says, why would we explore something in space? That doesn't make any sense to me, he said. And they're like, but we got plenty of time, and it's right there. And Riker's like, I guess, but that sounds stupid for people whose primary mission is to explore space, to explore something in space. All our heads hurt, but Data and Worf, they go over to the ship, and then after they beam on board, Data checks the oxygen levels, and he's like, pretty low oxygen levels here. It's a good thing they had any at all, apparently, because they would have just killed Worf just because. But Worf's going to blast the door open to get to the main part of the ship, and Data's like, you don't need to do that, and he just pushes the door right open. And they have all these cryogenic chambers, and so they start wiping away the windows, and they discover all these corpses, and Data's like, I think these things aren't working anymore. Pretty good deduction by Data, but then they come across three that were working. There's still people inside there, salvageable, so Data wants to bring them over to the ship. Picard's already called, and he's on his way back, and Riker's like, yeah, do whatever, but just hurry, so Picard doesn't find out and get mad that I sent you to explore space-related things. And so they bring the bodies back. Picard calls a senior staff meeting, and he's going on about the Romulans are to blame for destroying a bunch of outposts along the neutral zone. He's like, we haven't had contact with the Romulans in decades, even though Mr. Worf's entire primary backstory was the Romulans blew up an outpost, and then the Starfleet came to the aid of the Klingons. They forgot that, apparently, even though Worf in the episode says that, and then they go right back to saying we haven't had any contact with the Romulans in years. We wonder what they're like now. But they're convinced the Romulans were behind this, even though they had no proof. So they go to the neutral zone to check things out. Dr. Crusher calls Picard in to the sick bay, and she's like, about those 3 dead bodies that I brought back to life. And he's like, the what? That you did what to who? And she's like, yeah, Data brought a bunch of dead bodies over from this craft we found in space, and I just revived them. And he's all mad. He's like, Dr. Crusher? And she's like, well, what was I supposed to do? And he's like, oh, yeah. And so he's like, just keep them away from me, I guess. And then there were these 3 people. Ralph was a financier. There was Sonny, who was a musician, apparently. And then Clara, she was just a homemaker. And they were confused what a homemaker meant. They thought she was in construction, but she was just like a early 90s housewife. They had all died. Crusher was like, yeah, I cured those things really easy. They're fine now. And they were back. The financier guy, Ralph, he's like, somebody call my lawyer and let's get my bank accounts going. And they're like, it's 350 years from when you died. He's like, yeah, but I know someone's in that office now and they'll have all my money. And they're like, I don't think you understand the situation. Like, oh, I think I do. My money's safe because I planned for it. And then the musician guy, he just wants to hang out and play guitar and drink. And Dr. Crusher's like, yeah, that's how you died before all this drinking. He's like, yeah, what else are you supposed to do? And then the housewife, she's just crying every few minutes because she realized everyone she had ever known in her entire life was dead, and she never knew she was going to be frozen. But she's like, that idiot husband of mine just decided to do this just because it was a new fad. And she was kind of mad about it, but she was stuck. And so, as they're getting closer to the neutral zone, the financier gets on the comm system and he's calling to the captain. The captain goes down and yells at him for using the comm system, and he's like, yeah, we don't have money and accountants and so forth in this century. And the guy, Ralph's all freak out, like, that's the only reason for living. And Picard's like, sorry, not in this century. And Sonny, he's all like playing his guitar, and he wants Data to go on tour with him. And he's like, we aren't going to invite the Romulans, are we? And Data was like, highly unlikely. Then they get to the neutral zone, and the Romulans show up. And then this guy, Ralph, he sneaks from the quarters to the bridge. And Riker's like, get this man off the bridge. And the security go to get him, but then the Romulans come on the view screen. So they just stop. They don't take Ralph away at all. And Ralph's yelling at the Romulans. And he's like, they don't know who did all this damage. And the Romulans are like, yeah, we had damage on our side of the neutral zone. We were trying to see if you did it. And Picard's like, we were trying to see if you did it. And they point at each other and they laugh. And then they decide they got a common enemy somewhere. And the Romulan commander's like, yeah, we're going to keep an eye on you. And Picard's like, good, we'll keep an eye on you. And that was basically that with the Romulans. And then they decide they're going to drop off the passengers at a starbase somewhere because they don't want to go all the way to Earth with them because Picard was annoyed with the three of them. Completely annoyed. Some interesting notes in this one. It was Mark Alamo's second appearance on a Star Trek episode. Mark Alamo, formerly from Hill Street Blues, with many other shows under his belt, would go on to be a regular on Deep Space Nine. He played Gul Dukat, but he played 3 or 4 separate characters on The Next Generation, including the Romulan commander in this one. Like I said, the continuity was terrible because the whole thing from Conspiracy was not mentioned. Riker's character was completely out of character from anyone on Star Trek as he didn't understand exploring a vehicle in space that they encountered when that was the primary mission. Picard was completely annoyed the whole time with the 3 passengers, and normally he wouldn't be that annoyed with them. He'd be more sympathetic in later seasons, but they hadn't fleshed all that out. It was the final episode where Denise Crosby was in the credits as Tasha Yar as they wrap up the season. They made some wholesale changes starting for the first episode with season 2, but I'll get to that in episode 101. So pretty much